Hello and welcome to the CX Files for March 5th, 2026. My name's Mark Hillary and I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
And I'm Peter Ryan, back in Montreal after a great trip to Germany, one of my favorite countries in the world. Mark, great to see you. Spring is definitely springing here in Canada, and I am guessing that you guys are probably heading into a little bit of autumnal colors on your side.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one good thing about the autumn, though, is that the rain reduces, because
Yeah.
that's one of the sort of paradoxes of living near to so much rainforest. You actually get a lot of rain when it's hotter. So the middle of summer, we get loads of rain at the end of the day. So going into autumn, it's a lot nicer.
Right on. Well, that's fantastic. Well, today, Mark, we're going to be talking about one of the interviews that I conducted. Now, this is with a gentleman who goes by the name of Michel Stevens. Michel is based in Belgium, in the Antwerp area. And I caught up with Michel because there's been a lot of chatter in our industry of late regarding events, CX events, and what the future for the events industry is. Michelle had put a really cool post in 2025 down about how he felt that a lot of the events that were going on in the CX space weren't necessarily hitting all the right boxes or ticking all the right boxes. So I wanted to get on the horn with him to have a little chat about what the events sector in CX actually is doing right, maybe what it needs to rethink. Mark, you're like me. You travel to events, you see what goes on at industry conferences, trade shows, etc. And there's been, I think, a lot of focus in the last couple of years on networking, but there seems to be concern about a lack of thought leadership, and quite frankly, I think far too many exhibitors exhibiting the exact same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the push around AI has really just kind of like pushed this whole thing even further. You can go to some conferences that are on the surface, they're supposed to be about improving CX, but you get one talk after another about AI and people pretty much just repeating the same point.
Yeah, exactly. And Michelle chatted a little bit about this. He talked a little bit about what his thoughts were about what conferences need to do, how they need to evolve. I mean, I don't want to spill the beans in terms of the chat, but he did discuss a lot about how conferences need to be not necessarily as broad, but deeper, have subject matter experts on stage that haven't paid to be on stage, and to maybe not just be as big and not be as gregarious and have a smaller number of people, make it something that you can actually network properly at, but you can learn from too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll definitely support that. And hopefully we'll see some better events later this year.
But the thing is too, again, you and I have traveled to these events in the past. We've many times we've gone together to them. And one of the things that I find really challenging is when you arrive at an event, that might have 5,000 people at it, it's being able to separate the wheat from the chaff. Who do you want to talk to? How do you can't reasonably meet that volume of individuals. And I know that a lot of cases they'll have logs saying, well, this person's going to be there. If you're interested in meeting with this person, let us know and we'll facilitate an introduction, all within the privacy rules and so forth. But those don't work. Like, let's be perfectly frank. People don't want to go and be sold to at these events. And when it comes right down to it as well, I was saying to Michelle, on this side of the pond in North America, it seems that there's almost a CX or a BPO event every couple of weeks. And from the standpoint of resourcing, both financial as well as human resourcing, I don't know how organizations can actually be spending this amount of money exhibiting and sending people every couple of weeks to the next big event that you've got to be at. You're just seeing the same people at each one. You're hearing the same speakers. And at a certain point, you're hitting the law of diminishing returns.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would have thought that given that we have developed so many different dating apps, there seems to be dozens and dozens of them. Why can we not just apply the same kind of technology to events? So it matches you automatically with the kind of people that would
No.
be interesting.
You would imagine, but unfortunately, there's definitely a different way of doing things. And I think that what you've just suggested makes a lot of sense. But hey, maybe that's something for 2026.
Yeah, yeah, we'll see.
Well, why don't we head on over to our chat with Michel Stevens, who joins us, as I mentioned, from Antwerp. He is an absolutely fantastic person. I really enjoyed my chat with him. So, yeah, let's find out what he has to say. Well, the CX Files this week is really excited to travel across the Atlantic to talk with Michel Stevens. Now, Michel is based in Antwerp, in Belgium. He's the course director of the CXM Academy. Michel, it is great to have you on the CX Files. We've been planning this for a while now. I'm glad we were able to align schedules.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here, Peter. This one was indeed in the books for quite a while, but yeah, super stoked to be here and have a chat with you.
Fantastic. Well, one of the things I always like to say is that in our industry, schedules are really just good intentions. And at the end of the day, being able to align to schedule a half-hour podcast is certainly a feat in itself, especially when we're talking different continents and different time zones. But Michelle, I'd like to kick things off to talk a little bit about your role in the CXM Academy. Can you talk to us a little bit about what the Academy is all about?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is my strongest belief that if you want to make a change in customer experience in an organization, then you actually have to change the entire system. You have to challenge the entire system. So that means everybody in the organization, not just the 5 CX professionals, but everybody living inside that organization that is actually directly or indirectly having an impact on the customer experience. So that means finance, that means marketing. That means the people in customer service. So really everybody. And of course, everybody needs to be stimulated in a different way in that perspective. Some people need really concrete things like I have people on the phone every single day, help me with that. And others just want to be inspired by doing right by the customer. What does that mean? And me as a course director, I make sure that the material is always up to date, always in line with the latest research and the best practices. And that's basically what I do and tailor it to the specific contexts that we work in, be it in Norway or the US or Spain. That is absolutely different. And that's what I do all day, actually.
What I like about how you describe it is it sounds like, first of all, a very thorough curriculum, number one. Number two, I like the fact that you've got a global view. So you're able to ascertain what are some of the best practices from a training and empowerment standpoint, as you mentioned, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in North America, other points, and so forth. And that gives you a very unique perspective, I think, Michelle. Now, one of the things that I'm very excited to talk to you about today is the perspective you've got on an aspect of our industry that I think has really taken debate by storm the past year and a half or so. Now, the reason I reached out to you for this interview, as you might recall a few months ago, was some comments that you'd made on LinkedIn about industry events. Now, one of the things that I've been picking up on as I've been chatting with friends all over the world in our industry is some concern about the direction industry events are going. One of the things I keep hearing about is there are too many of them, or we're all just talking about the same things, or we're not hearing any thought leadership at industry events anymore. It all seems to be the same merry-go-round, literally going around and around and around. And there's an expectation you've got to be at industry events no matter what, where, or how. You've got to make sure that you're attending all of them. So, Michelle, as I sort of finish off my long preamble there, what I'd like to do is start our chat out by asking you, as somebody who I would consider to be very much a leader and an influencer in our space, how would you personally characterize the state of CX industry events going into 2026?
Yeah, so I'm not going to win awards with this. To be really clear, I mean, I make money by going to events myself. I am on stage on a regular basis as well, and the industry doesn't like me for what am I about to say. It is actually that if your conference can be replaced by a YouTube playlist, then you actually have a real big problem. And I think that we are at an inflection point here. The traditional conference model, the one that is built around keynotes and exhibition halls and networking drinks, they were designed for a different era. It was designed for a time when information was scarce and access to experts was actually limited. Just today, I actually had 3 conversations with people I don't know from somewhere else in the world. And they reached out because they wanted to have an opinion. And I mean, today I can watch a keynote on YouTube. I can connect with any expert on LinkedIn. So the question becomes, what is the unique value of getting on a plane or in the car and spending 2 days at a conference? And I think that many organizers haven't answered that question convincingly. So what I'm seeing is some kind of bifurcation. On one side, you have the larger trade shows that are essentially marketing platforms for vendors, sorry to say. And they serve a certain purpose, and let's be honest about what that purpose is, for all sake of clarity. And on the other side, you're starting to see smaller, more intimate gatherings that prioritize depth over scale. And I think that the future belongs to the latter, but the economics are obviously harder to make work.
But Michel, you raise a very interesting point about some of these larger events. And one of the big criticisms I hear more and more and I was at one, for full disclosure, at the end of last year in the UK, and I had a great time in terms of the networking, but did I get anything out of keynotes? Did I get anything out of going and talking to people at booths? Not really. It was more a gathering point where you knew colleagues were going to be there, where there's maybe the chance to trade some gossip, meet some new people who you might not have met before from the influencer community. But the complaint I consistently heard from buyers, individuals who were attending this trade show, was all it is a bunch of AI exhibitors, and the keynotes are basically people that are paying to be on stage. So if we're at that point with the trade show model, I think you make a very valid point, not a good point, but a valid point, that a lot of this information is already out there on YouTube, and that saves you a heck of a lot of time and money as opposed to flying 1 hour or even 10 hours to take part in one of these things.
Yeah, I think it's, I think that the question that we need to ask ourselves is, why does it happen, right? I think it's because the incentives around it are misaligned, right? And I'm not blaming any organizers, event organizers, because it is really hard to do. I mean, organizers are optimizing for ticket sales and sponsorship revenue, right? Not necessarily for intellectual novelty. And whereas speakers, they are optimizing for visibility and not necessarily pushing the boundaries of their thinking. And I agree with you. I mean, I was at a conference myself last year, and the most exciting thing that happened on that conference was actually at a dinner party. It was just a group of people that said, hey, let's go out for dinner afterwards, and people I didn't know, actually. And all of a sudden, I sat across a very lovely lady who runs a SaaS company. And actually, she was on stage before. I didn't attend her keynote, unfortunately, but I had the most lovely conversation because it was candid. It was straight to the point. It was honest. And I was like, yeah, why can't we have that in the conference hall as well? And yeah, so that's a difficult thing. That's a thing I'm struggling with. But it's totally fair to be critical about that industry because, yeah, it's not living up to its promise right now.
It's really not living up to its promise. And one of the things that I personally take away from the conference scene now in CX is when you watch a lot of these keynotes, I'm not saying all of them, but when you watch a lot of them, it seems to be a 40,000-foot TED Talk style view with very little depth or granularity. And as somebody said to me, it almost seems when you go to one of these keynotes now that they're just trying to sell you something. And that's not why you attend a conference.
No, and actually the only conferences that I go to are the ones that where I know they have a reputation of being a little bit different, not necessarily the biggest ones. The biggest one I attended last year was, I think, 350 people It's not small, but it's not the biggest one either. And I mean, the first keynote of the day was somebody who was standing on a stage and talking about his heart attack that he had and how it changed his life. And you could see all the parallels with business life. And to that degree, it was inspiring that when the talk was over, I walked out. I called my wife and said, you know what? I just realized something, and I'm sorry that I haven't been much more. I haven't been home much more often. I'm going to make that work in the next year, which I'm doing, by the way, Peter. But that is the thing that we should be going for, right? And if we keep on selling to people, then yeah, attendees are not stupid. I mean, they can smell a sponsored keynote from row 10, right? And that's the thing. We are not necessarily looking for the key insight, but we're looking for how is this going to change me as a listener, as audience? How is this going to help me? At the same conference, by the way, the last keynote speaker, Paul Craven, by the way, which I can highly recommend, he gave some pointers where I was like, yes, this is something I can take away today and implement tomorrow, basically. And aside from that, he's also a lovely chap and a great speaker.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the depth that you were discussing about what we need in CX industry events now. And I think that's a really good way of putting it. You're talking about more curated events with in-depth topics with speakers that are able to really get into the weeds. How do you see events like this coming together, Michel? What should organizers be thinking about when they're putting together an event that somebody like you or somebody like me or potential buyers of services are going to want to attend and learn something from?
Yeah. As I indicated before, the best ROI from a conference lead the best ROI from a conference isn't the lead, but it's actually a changed perspective. Let's put it straight off the bat, right? And I think that if you're organizing an event, there are three things that you need to do differently. First of all, you need to prioritize interaction over presentation. I mean, that is what drives, whenever I engage with somebody on this topic, this is the one I get back. It's the interactions that make it happen for me, right? It's also something that you indicated before. I mean, the most valuable moments at any conference happen in the hallways and not necessarily in the keynote hall. So we need to design for that. So we need to create formats that force people to talk to each other, right? To work on problems together or to share their real challenges. And then secondly, and this is also something that you mentioned, is curate ruthlessly, right? Smaller, more focused events with carefully selected attendees will always beat large generic gatherings, right? And third of all, and this is my personal opinion, be honest about your business model. If you're a trade show, be a great trade show. If you're a learning event, be a great learning event. But don't pretend to be the one while you're actually the other. And I also say, listen to your attendees, right? Just don't ask them what they want. Watch what they actually do. Where do they spend their time? What sessions do they skip? What conversations do they have over dinner? The answers are in the behavior, not in the feedback forms. And I would say, and this is my final thing, I would say take risks. I mean, the best events I've attended were the ones where the organizer tried something generally new. Some were unexpected and didn't work, right? And some did. Maybe it failed because it was not interesting, but the worst events are the ones that play it safe and deliver exactly what you expected and nothing more.
You know, I think that you're raising a very pertinent point in that you've got to evolve events. And as somebody who runs their own series of events each year, one of the big things that I'm always thinking about, and I'm chatting with my business partners about, is how do we make sure that we keep fresh, that we don't get stale? We can't keep doing the same thing over and over again. And I love your comment about interactions, because the beauty about some of these events is that you get a whole bunch of people in a similar industry in a room, and there's a chance for them to compare notes, to compare, contrast experiences, etc. And I think also, let's be perfectly frank as well, Michelle. Some people are naturally extroverted. Some people don't necessarily feel comfortable in that environment, but would like to maybe interact a bit more. Forums in which there can be more interaction. I don't want to say forced interaction, but interaction as part of the game, interaction as part of the playlist. That's great because you might have the chance to catch up with some folks that you've got a lot in common with that otherwise you never would have had the chance to speak to if you're just sitting down next to them during some boring keynote.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, I agree, and of course you need to cater to the different personalities that you have at a conference. Some people are genuinely happy to walk into a group of 10 people and start giving their opinion, obviously, while others aren't. But I think that you need to think up front about how am I going to make sure that everybody gets their say or their at least their chance to say something, to contribute to the conversation, to add to that conversation. The technology is there, the techniques are there. There are many opportunities there that we can actually use. I mean, there are crazy formats like fish bowls and the bar stool. I mean, these are ideas that have been tried and tested, and some of them will work at your event or not. That depends on you, but you should be knowing, yeah, who are my people. I've been chatting with a few people, right? I've been thinking about it a lot myself, and what different kind of CX gathering might look like. Something smaller, more intimate, more focused on the conversation that never happened in public. And I don't have all the answers. I'm not pretending to have them, but I think there is appetite for something different. And if you put people together and they have a certain level of knowledge or at least interest and openness to learn from each other, not necessarily as the one who is standing on the stage, but somebody who is actually one of my peers, I'm willing to listen to them and I want to learn from them, and not just the fancy, nice slides. Just tell me where you failed. Tell me where you crashed and burned. Those are the things I generally look forward to.
You know, it's funny because I wrote a blog at the start of this year for trends to watch in 2026 in CX. One of the more controversial ones that I brought up was I'm predicting there's going to be a shakeout in industry events this year. Look, Michelle, the reality is that budgets only go so far, people's time only goes so far. And like you were saying about wanting to spend more time at home, I know people on this side of the pond who are, I'm not joking when I say they are literally every week traveling to a different industry event. The sector can't sustain that amount of trade shows or of conferences and so forth. And when it comes right down to it, you've given some really good insight in regards to what I think forward-looking organizers of events are going to have to be thinking about to make sure that their events are going to be sustainable and not some of the ones that are going to be thrown by the wayside.
No, yeah, and I think that you know there are a few conferences that I go to as an attendee as well, and these are the ones I really look forward to. Because I know, for instance, I went to my last conference last year was in November. I also spoke there, but that is beside the point. But where I said, you know what, I like being here, and actually, as a speaker, I stay there all day, right? I spend my entire day and having conversations with people, and I genuinely looked forward to it. And also said, I actually started my keynote like that. I said, you know what, this is a place where I feel like home. You are my people. If I say some term, you will understand it because you're my people, and you can relate to people. So again, more is not the answer to the problem, right? It's better. Better is the answer to our problem that we're having here. Yeah, curation.
You know, Michelle, this has been a very refreshing chat, and it's nice to be able to talk to somebody to validate what so many people speak to me about anecdotally when it comes to the event circuit. So, thanks very much for taking some time to be on the CX Files today. And it's interesting because before we hit the record button, we were chatting a little bit about you being, as we'd say in French, un franc parleur, somebody who's very straightforward and to the point, and sometimes you ruffle some feathers. We like that on the CX Files. We don't want people that are going to be yes women or yes men. We want people that are going to come out and have strong opinions. This is one that I think deserves more attention. I've been in the industry. You and I, again, we're comparing notes. We've both been around for a couple of decades. And I think that for many of us, we learned a lot about what the sector was all about by attending these events. So, with any luck, in 2026, we'll be able to get back on the right track when it comes to industry conferences and trade shows. But in the meantime, I wish you a very warm rest of the day. As I mentioned to you earlier, it's minus 31 at the time of recording here in Montreal. And I'm definitely hoping that spring will be sprung sooner rather than later.
Thank you so much for having me on the show, Peter. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.